welcome, Peter. And it's great to have you as the opening session for GGA's 2020 Annual Forum.
Okay, great to be here, Annabelle. I'm really pleased to be talking to you today and then joining the forum.
Yeah, great. Look, and congratulations on your new role with GRDC, General Manager of Research and Development. So some big shoes to fill after Bronwyn, but we're all looking forward to seeing where you take the role.
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. It's great to be back in Australia to re-enter the agricultural innovation system in Australia. I actually am the GM for Applied Research Development and Extension.
Sorry.
So, I've no problem. I'm really pleased to have that connection between the on-farm agronomy right through to how do we engage as a front-facing to growers around Australia through the extension effort.
Fantastic, and that's a great segue to talk about where you've come from. You've just spent some significant time in India, leaving ICRISAT, or the International Crop Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, and CGIR work as the Director General. And I imagine key to your role in that is exactly what you describe, is doing the research, getting the outcomes, but linking it back into the local communities and the local farmers and industry that you're working with. Both those organisations have a very strong mandate to partner, which really drives collaboration as an underpinning criteria for success, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I want to just get a feel from you about those organisations and how important collaboration is, and we'll step into, I guess, what I'd like to hear from you is, what frameworks do those organisations use? How do you start finding that collaboration pathway? How do you work out who the collaborators are and identify them and then start selecting them?
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. It's really nice to be able to talk about this Cooperative Group for International Agricultural Research, the CGIR, which was an organisation set up 50 years ago by the global community to deal with food insecurity and poverty based in rural communities around the world. Australia has been a very strong supporter, has been a contributor in terms of financial support, but also capacity people like myself working within the CGIR over the last 50 years. And I was the Director General of ICRISAT. ICRISAT had a mandate for the semi-arid tropics, really the dry land tropics of the world. Australia would fit into that. Australia's got semi-arid tropics, but maybe not the particular. Australian farms aren't ICRISAT's particular focus. It's the small farmers, poor farmers around the world. Just to say a little bit more about ICRISAT, we had the global mandate for really important food crops, the sorghum, millets, and the pulses, chickpea, pigeon pea, groundnut. They're really important food crops around the world. We grow sorghum in Australia as a feed resource, but it supports hundreds of millions of people around the world as a staple. So why did the world set up the CGIR and these international institutes? Well, it's because agriculture underpins the economies and the livelihoods of many of these small farmers. And my role as the DG of ICRISAT, based in India, but having facilities and staff in 13 countries around the world, mainly in Africa and South Asia, was about partnership. It was, our role wasn't to deliver outcomes and outputs or technologies directly to farmers. We had to work through the national systems. And when you walk into a country like Burkina Faso, there's a national system there. It needs support. The level of resourcing is nowhere near as good as DPIRD in Western Australia or the departments of ag, or the ability of grower groups to self-organise in these parts of the world. So the CGIR ICRISAT's role was to support the national system. So we have our pre-breeding, breeding programs. We would never release a variety directly. We would work with a national system that our material could feed onto their breeders and be released to support growers. So I think that's a really important point, is that it's not about replacing the national systems, but underpinning, supporting, providing capacity development through those national systems globally, so that benefits can be delivered to these smallholder farmers that improve their livelihoods.
That's fantastic. I mean, it comes back and it's putting the oil or the oil to the cogs to help the cogs run better in the national systems, or that then feed down into the regional and then local systems. And in those experiences, did you find that you could see in the partnerships and collaboration that you're working on, could you see that direct impact right down to that local level? Did you see that kind of, looking at the list of collaborators across both of the institutes? There are farmer associations and farmer networks I can see. How did they link in, and how was that collaboration effective?
Yeah, I think it's over the 50 years we've had to take stock. There's been some real successes. India, where ICRISAT was headquartered, has the second largest public agricultural research institute in the world, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. 20,000 scientists. So So what's our role there has evolved to where what we can do to support that system. It's about helping them with their global connectivity, to connect them into the global network. That differs very much from many African countries where the national system doesn't have the resources to support. And it's a very good point you make. It's not just about the public system. I think that's one of the realizations, that as we look at the development and progress in Africa, it's not going to be driven out of the public purse or of the public. We have to look at what's happening in the markets, the value chains, and we have to bring in those other players, actors in the value chains. And that's from farmers, farmer cooperatives, farmer groups, the NGOs that are there supporting, like World Vision or Care International, the supporting that network, through to those in the value chains that are creating market opportunities for agricultural commodities. And so I think that's one of the learnings over the last 50 years, is that we have to be much more inclusive of that full innovation system, not just focus on the public sector and delivering technologies, approaches to farmers, what might be on-farm impact. We have to have that much broader view about where innovation's going to have an impact. And so, yes, we've evolved very much how we've operated over those years, and have to be adaptive to our partners and where the partners want to take a lead. I'll say one more thing is that, like many providers in Australia, the CGIAR and ICRISAT were totally dependent on funding. So we had clients too. Australia was a funder. So we had to report that there were going to be benefits from those investments, whether it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, USAID, or ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. We had to demonstrate that what we were doing was leading to impact. So we can only do that through a partnership with these partners that I'm talking about, the collaboration, to see that there was going to be impact.
So it's that critical point of ensuring that with that investment partner, let's call it, that the value is going to be created, it's clearly articulated upfront, and you're reporting on that along the way. With those types of entities in creating partnerships or working with them collaboratively, it's like project management, do, act, change, revise, review. How did that change over time, or did it change overly over time? And I mean, I guess with partnerships, and when you come together and you bring in that diversity of the innovation system, recognising everyone has a responsibility or a particular role to play, it's got to be agile and, adaptable, because you often don't get it right, perhaps, the first time, and you need to adjust and you need to change, and it needs to be a bit iterative. How did you manage that with an organisation like the Gates Foundation? Did that change over time, or was that fairly established when you were in your role?
I think everything changes over time. Well, there's an elements that are core, that are when you look at the CGIAR, there's this view of what's international public goods that you have to tackle at a global reach, rather than at a country by country or an organisation by organisation. And so that's one of the core rationales for the CGIAR, that there's these international public goods. If the Gates Foundations or Australia or the US invest in, it's going to benefit not just one country, but all countries that involved in that agricultural system. And so the easiest one of that is our crop improvement, our breeding programs for these crops. If you find innovation that can improve the digestibility or the productivity of a millet, that's going to benefit many people across a whole range of different countries and ecologies. So that's one rationale for the continued investment. But it's insufficient. If you look at the productivity of these crops that ICRISAT dealt with in India, there's been a rapid rise because there's been innovation and investment in core research around these crops, about those breeding programs supported by the CGIAR and the national system, and there's been rapid productivity increases in India. You go to those same crops, same ecologies in West Africa, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and the productivity is plateaued or even reducing. So even though we've put the same level of investment, the same technologies, innovations can be brought to place, we haven't had the same impact. And that, I think, is a somewhat late realisation in that old world, that international world, is that we just can't take that technology and an approach to innovation when there's other drivers out there that are impacting on decision makers, whether they be farmers, whether they be the public sector, or be the other players in the innovation. So we've got to be much more attuned to the innovation system, understanding that it's not just that technological solutions are going to drive livelihood benefits. There's other dimensions you have to play. So it's much more nuanced, much more bringing in the social science. Now, we understand that. When I was there, were we successful in shifting over to our investment to see the success? Well, maybe not. We've got the realisation, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
It's the learning from it that then comes to realise that we can have these national, international technical solutions, yet to deliver at that regional or country or regional or local level, it's still so important to apply that in an iterative way to ensure that it's fit for purpose at that scale or at that level, taking into account, it could be culture, it could be connectivity, our optic fibre. It could be many things that actually limit what actually is the uptake or the adoption of what that new technology could be.
Yeah, look, Annabelle, I want to say it's a good connection into when we start talking about Australia too, is that you've got to realise that the people on the ground there's many people looking for livelihood benefit. And I think ICRISAT's role and the international community's role was about listening to where that innovation could be from those that know that locality best, and seeing where formalised research, development, engagement can help foster that innovation.
Yeah,
so
and knowing what's right when as well.
Yeah, so it's a really important aspect, is that local knowledge about what the opportunities are. And if somebody wants to invest there, how do you support their investment? I think it's got the same story and the same as we talk about move to the Australian innovation system.
Well, I'm about to move that way because I thought this was the great opportunity to do that. And perhaps, prior to India, you're chief research scientist with CSIRO. You've done a plethora of work and modelling work and project work in that space, and want to talk about, I guess, the collaborative efforts you've taken and approached there. What would have been one of the highlights that you left with when you headed overseas?
Look, I have to start this, you asked me about the highlight. I have to start with going to the Australian Agronomy Conference in 2001 and giving a talk, being very critical of grower groups, saying grower groups taking resources and space away from the formal innovation system, the research community, by getting GRDC dollars. And so I gave this talk about these grower groups that doing on-farm research. It wasn't very good quality. Not sure it's the best. Anyway, I spoke before Ian McClellan from the Birch Cropping Group, giving a talk about how good grower groups were. Anyway, at the end of that,
red flag to a bull.
Yes. At the end of that session, we obviously started talking about our two perspectives, and Ian invited me to come and visit the Birch Cropping Group, and and from there started a fantastic collaboration with BCG, which ended up in developing an innovative online system called Yield Profit that any farmer in Australia can get access to look at how they can best manage in-season investment risk around which variety to plant, how much fertiliser to put on, and it's still used today. But that also connected me into the grower network, the grower group network around Australia, and I formed relationships all across Australia.
Yeah.
So, I think that was a highlight for me was to have the opportunity to respond, to move out of a more formal approach to how I was doing my research into something that was connected much more on ground. And my relationship with the grower groups around Australia led to lots of excellent collaboration.
And I think that's key. It's the linking the formal research with the social infrastructure that actually sits across the landscape, and to make research succeed will create that success opportunity. But what a great scenario where you had two entities at this conference. It actually could have gone quite negatively for both of you, but you ended up coming together. And I guess that, in a way, is that your visit to BCG, is that what triggered your interest in saying, okay, we've got something here. These people are deeply connected at the local level. I'm deeply connected at the research level. You're understanding the differences in your role and the strength of those two, the sum of parts coming together to be stronger together. Is that kind of what trickled through your thinking, or was it a bit more organic?
No, I think it's that. But also, I think a really important point here when you talk about collaboration, and particularly in an RD&E space, is how do you react to critique, to criticism?
Sure.
Research. Research is about criticism, about falsification. Karl Popper was a philosopher that came up with this idea. Well, first promoted the idea that we have a null hypothesis and we try to prove it. We falsify it. We can't prove something's correct. We can falsify something. And so criticism is the basis of agricultural research. And so, what I was doing was I was reading something that came from the grower groups. I critiqued it. Now that could have led to a bit of a blue, but instead, BCG and the other grower groups that I critiqued there are saying, no, we want to understand what you're talking about here. Why are you saying what you're saying? Can we get better? And then that formed the relationship. So it's one key aspect, I think, in RD&E, not collaboration.
Sure.
Society. Yeah. But when you're talking about research, if you're a bit precious about putting something up and you're a bit worried about critique, or you don't accept critique, then it's going to be difficult. But that's what, and it comes both ways. I hear it a lot when I was with CSIRO, a lot of criticism, and I got close to growers, we don't understand what's happening in the paddock. So there was benefit both ways from the critique that we listened to, coming from both sides.
And particularly in RD&E, it is actually the role of researchers to be critical, to analyse, to be the cynic, let's call it, and pull it apart. And that's a key, that's part of, when you build a collaboration, is working out who you want at the table. You need the optimist, you need the cynic, you need the strategist. And that's just the skill set I think that part of the ecosystem brings to a team is the rigour, the critique and the rigour that's required. Farmers, farmer groups, industry, they bring the reality check of, well, is this real? And that's what we've got to, I believe, come together and learn to respect each other on. That is because when we can actually recognise those strengths in individual plays, we could actually achieve great things together.
Yeah. I think it's always got to be permutations to the system. We can't be too comfortable in anyone's role within the system, and so to continue to evolve and innovate, you need some level of permutation, and critique is a good way to do that. So anyway, that's what I think when I look back on that, almost 20 years ago, and I think a very strong connection between CSIRO when I was there and the grower groups around Australia was built on that ability to say, what are we doing? What are you doing? What can we do something? How can we do something better together? Have this mutual benefit, this idea of mutual benefit, but also having the trust. I think you brought it up earlier.
Yeah, I was about to say, well, mutual benefit's a great spot to then start talking about trust, because you've got to get to that point, and it's not an easy thing to build, a very easy thing to break, and often can't be rebuilt. So would like to hear a little bit more about building that and how you built that in the networks that you work with.
Yeah, I think there's it's getting to know people beyond the work as well. I think one of the nice achievements of that time when I was with CSIRO working with grower groups is that, I'm still friends with most of those players around Australia. I had a number of members of the grower groups come to visit me in India when I was there.
Fantastic.
So as part of the idea of everyone's very connected to their work, but so the work can be, well, what are we going to achieve through the work? But how do we buy into this issue of working together? It's not just a formula, and I think you see that in agriculture in Australia too. This buy-in to, well, what's happening in your world, what's happening in my world. It was really important in those days, and it was, as I said, it was very strongly mutually beneficial to both my group in CSIRO and I think to the grower group. Well, hopefully the grower groups would say that we work with.
Yeah. And I think, look, it's something that we often think, okay, we're at work, let's be professional, we don't bring our personal in, but it's in my reading it. So they talk about the need to create that personal connection, because that creates the strength in the bonds that actually then build that mutual trust. So it's that push to actually start seeing more the person, not the organisation, and building that interpersonal relationships really critical to that trust. And look, you might take a while to understand what your mutual benefit is to each other. And, in a small project, you might get there quickly, and in a larger initiative that you want to work towards, you might you head up against the wall for years about trying to get to a mutual situation. But you will get there potentially if you work on those individual relationships as well as the organisational relationships. I think that's a really good point.
I think sorry, Annabelle, I think it's part of the business model of the grower groups. With the grower group alliance, is that you don't just form relationships, abstract relationship with your members, the growers, the staff members. What I've seen in the grower groups, they embed all the staff with the community and get that connection beyond just the work. And then if you walk in and start collaborating with the grower group, they bring. And when I went to Minanue, Irwin or Levy, I didn't stay down the road in a pub. I was, stayed with the grower members, got to know the people, and so it was part of the business model, I reckon, of grower groups is to attract people in and bring them part of the community that's trying to support what's happening locally, but in the community.
It's certainly one of their key strengths in their social side of their business is that interrelational play, and how they then play that key connector beyond their local communities. I think it's really extremely powerful. What I want to move to is probably maybe something a bit trickier, which is I think perhaps some grower groups feel the power imbalance is how do you actually broker into collaborations when you've got, let's say, an RDC, GRDC, MLA sitting over here with big buckets of cash, but then groups are over here trying to work out local initiatives and trying to bridge the divide. Sometimes you can go into negotiations very uneven. And how in your experiences have you dealt with kind of uneven starting platforms for negotiation?
Well, firstly, Annabelle, I can say I've just joined GRDC, so with the resources that we're investing on behalf of the levy payers around Australia and the Australian government. But what I can say when I come into this role, I have been on the other side. ICRISAT, we were dependent on having a relationship with the Gates Foundation or Australia or the US, European Union about giving that value for that business model about why should they invest in us to achieve the outcome. And so I fully understand the other side of the table. I've been there most of my career, trying to create the value that we want, that we can get investors such as GRDC, the RDCs, to invest in. So I think that's what I bring to the role here. There is a power imbalance because I acknowledge that GRDC does have the resources, but we also have the responsibility that we're representing the levy payers who are members of those grower groups that are also the beneficiaries there, and we have to answer to them in almost on a daily basis in terms of the number of events that are going on. Although these are uncertain times with how we're engaging on turning up to field days. But, so I think people have got to acknowledge that the GRDC has a role. It has a mandated role. It has a strategy. It has a mode of operation about how do we move through to eliciting issues from growers, working through an investment analysis to then decide on, well, what's the first order priorities that we should be investing in. So that's the role we have. I, in this role, shortly in this role, really do want to engage with the key partners out there to ensure that that works efficiently and ends up with the best outcomes from the investments that GRDC can make.
Okay, great. Peter, look, I get that, and I guess this is part of a understanding about looking at your stakeholders who you perhaps want to work with and collaborate with, and working out what their business model is as well, and seeing where the alignment fits, and working out, okay, you know, if I'm going to deal with a national organisation, where are they heading and what value are they looking for, and then how am I ready and fit to do a matching value and actually collaborate together. So, you know, I think that's a really important question for individuals, organisations to ask themselves, is around, am I ready to partner and collaborate with their investment, or is our investment ready to partner? You know, it's about coming together, and this is, I guess, a part of the imbalance, let's call it, not the power imbalance, and working out where you meet in the middle to start that mutual benefit identification.
Yeah, look, I agree. I would say that this is a first order issue for me in this role. I have responsibility for the close to practice investments that GRDC might make. Close to practice meaning the D&E, and that's the space that many of the grower groups operate in. And so it's a first order issue for me to understand what the current ecosystem around the grower groups and the providers that operate in that space, what the expectations of growers are, what the likely returns can be, and how the systems have evolved over the last 10 years. Basically, for the last 10 years, I've been looking offshore, looking at what's happening internationally around the world. Even when I was with CSIRO, my last responsibility was our international work, not the post. So what has evolved over the last 10 years? Are grower groups much the same? Is the same business model being operated? Have they been able to maintain that enthusiasm I saw from 20 years ago? The real drive to get local practice change. Is that being maintained? Is there buy-in from the next generation of growers coming on board? Where is there, as you talked about, this innovation cannot be just single source. It just can't come from the research community, can't just come from GRDC staff. Innovation is a result of communication and getting together the multiple players here. So what's the best way of doing that? If the Grower Group Alliance in West Australia has the lead on something that's really innovative, then we've got to see how the GRDC can support that if it fits our investment strategy. So look, I can't give a definitive answer right now, but it's certainly first order for me in this role as I look forward.
Well, that's great to hear and exciting to hear. I think, you know, the system that we've been working on together here with the network of grower groups in WA is actually a program of collaboration of how we actually work together, recognises differences both in size, strength, form of groups, but how we also link in with organisations like the department over here, and how do we help assist their business model move forward and create relevance for them. And that'll probably be one of the last things I want to touch on before I'm going to throw a question back to you regarding your next steps in your role. But one of the key things that can really undermine a collaboration once you're stuck in, not stuck in, but you're underway, is the difference in culture. So GGA, we collaborate with the department strongly, deeply, but we're very different organisations. Now, they are large, lots of process. We're small. We've got 6 members of our team. We move at a much faster rate, and sometimes that can cause tension. Where you've experienced that, I'm sure with working with groups versus CSIRO, you've probably been exposed to that. How have you dealt with that?
Well, working in an international organisation, so an Australian, being the Director General of an organisation headquartered in India, but having staff are all through Africa, from Francophone West Africa through to Southern and Eastern Africa. The culture can be based on the country you're in, but also the organisations, the different institutes, whether you're working with an NGO or the national system or the private sector. And so, you have to be conscious of that. Culture is very important in how do you drive innovation and change. Coming here to us into Australia, there is an innovation system. There's sort of an established innovation. You talked about the state departments like DPIRD, CSIRO. And then what was interesting when I go back to 2001 and my commentary around grower groups is that they were permutations. Here's this new phenomenon that came in, upset that norm of how research, development, and extension was being delivered in Australia, and it caused some ruffles. I got a few ruffles and wrote that paper, but it actually helped evolve the system to a better place. Now, are we back into a norm today? When I look at the Australian innovation system, is there a sort of everybody sort of got their place, doing their job, and we're turning over? It might be really successful. I don't want to be judgmental at this point in time about how successful it is, but fully understanding that there is these different places. The state government, CSIRO is the national science agency. Small organisations like GGA and all the little members, and then the grower groups around Australia, and then there's the private sector, all the consultants, advisors. Australian grain growers. What is it? I don't know what the number is. 70 to 90% have consultants. Private sector, whether they're agribusiness firms, etc. So that's a diverse innovation system. And what are their roles? And are there pressures coming from one sector to another to say we want to move in this sector? We've got ideas that we think can be broader. I need to understand that, but I think that's part of human activity systems, Annabelle, is that that's how we've got to operate, and we've got to see what's who's best placed to drive the outcomes you want to see. I'm not sure.
That best placement comes from identifying the right. It's matching the role of the activity to be best placed at that time is what I see as a movement forward in mapping the culture and saying, okay, well, I or this organisation A over here will not always necessarily be the lead. It might be another one. It'll be dependent on the outcome that we're trying to achieve in the innovation space itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly one for, I think one thing I've learned over a reasonably long career is that you have to have your ears open for where that innovation comes from and where different partnerships could really drive that innovation. Now, I think in a space like GLEC, there has to be, much like I talked about with ICRISAT, there has to be this continual investment in the underpinning work that people expect to see. But we can't spend 100% of resources in that. There has to be investments, riskier investments going to have a higher return. There has to be investments in different ways of doing the same thing to see whether we can permutate and improve faster. But look, I'm really looking forward to getting out and, well, hard to say that on a COVID.
Well, it's tricky. The complex nature of Zoom.
Yeah, with the various plays out there and understand, well, what's happening today. And also where the industry needs to go. One of the last things I wrote at CSIRO as a formal paper before I left, I said, look, Australian grains industry done really well. They're really have high technical efficiency, meaning that they've closed the production gap between what they are achieving, what they should be achieving. And so, what's next for them? They have to look for profitability, productivity gains. I'm wanting to test that, pressure test that with the various connections I've got, and seeing, well, how much do we invest in D&E activities, like known technologies, getting farmers to use them. But if their farmers are already using basically much of that, then we have to move on. Well, how much do we invest in innovation that can drive profitability and productivity? So yeah, that's a conversation.
Sure. and the landscape, we're all very well established, like you say, but then what are the driving parts in between, and how do we actually manage or invest in, and I'm not just talking about dollars, I mean invest time, resources in actually working out those relational connectors and making them work as efficiently as possible, and not just, let's say, doing the copy and paste and saying, well, this, here's your framework that worked last time, let's do that again, a bit like what you described at the beginning of the presentation around, we worked out all this technology, but you got to these African communities and you could have all the, have it mapped out perfectly. It's still going to have some need for change and adaptation and flexibility at that local level to be fit for purpose. So yeah. I think the innovation system is ripe to really energise that and mobilise those connection functions. I think that the WA grower groups are particularly in a strong position as a network working together to actually drive some great collaboration where they can actually be driving the local need, but it be fitting into a regional or national framework. I think there's a great opportunity. So looking forward to hearing from you about how you see that rolling with your role in GRDC.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to connecting with you, Annabelle, and all your members. And I am the executive on the Western panel, so I have a particular focus at this point in time in the West. I really hope that I can get over there sometime in the near future and catch up with some old friends and have some face-to-face connections about understanding what's happening in the West. But it's amazing, this technology too. We can still have these good engagements.
And look, I'm going to stop it there because I think I want to revert to the live audience now to be able to chat around what might that process look like. How do we start having that collaborative discussion with GRDC in that space? So I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you for taking the time this morning to put this record in place. And we'll now switch live. Thanks, Peter.